What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another Ready or Not video. In this video, we're going to be checking out my recommendation for loadouts and equipment within Ready or Not, and this is guided towards newer players that need a little bit of assistance in the game clearing single player. And I just want to elaborate, when I say solo or single player, I'm aiming towards playing the game with AI in the single player game mode. I'm not referring to downloading a mod and going in lone wolf. That's a completely different ball game, and we might get into that at another time. However, I would highly recommend that you'd stay away from that. Obviously, the game wasn't necessarily designed to go in lone wolf. It's fun for some people. I personally don't like to play the game that way. I like it to be as immersive as possible in kind of like a SWAT sim, a police sim type deal. So I kind of avoid that, but maybe someday we'll kind of go into like solo CQB in the future and kind of get into that. Now, like I said, this is for newer players. However, seasoned players might also get a little bit of knowledge out of this. So if you do, that's awesome as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, I'm going to be going into details, kind of giving a quick rundown as to what I typically run, and this is both for co-op and single player. Now, obviously, your co-op kit could be extremely similar to your single player kit, but depending on the map, you might want to change it up slightly. And that's another thing too. Like, this isn't going to be a min-max guide. This is mostly going to be like a general overview as to what you would expect out of a decent loadout when going into any type of map. I'm not just going to be gearing this towards like a specific certain kind of maps. This is just for everything, just kind of a blanket. Like, this is what I recommend you to run. Obviously, some things can be changed up here and there, but it's just kind of like an overview as to what I would recommend overall for everything. All right, so a quick breakdown as to what I typically run, and this is pretty much for both single player and co-op. However, like I said, things are going to be different depending on the type of level, so you just kind of have to experiment a little bit. So my favorite weapon in the game is the HK416, and I am running a modification which gives the real names for the rifles, but if you do look through your rifles, it's a very similar name. They just changed the letters around, and you'll probably notice just by the way the weapon looks. Now, it's a high-powered rifle, and I pretty much started out the game using only the M4A1 because I love the M4A1. However, I shortly learned after testing out the HK that it has an extremely high stopping power, which is great for a lot of armored suspects, and it does the job for unarmored suspects as well. So that kind of led to why I recommend using a high-powered rifle in general, and the HK416 is always going to be my go-to rifle, but I do enjoy running a bunch of different types of rifles in Ready or Not. But if you see my videos, then you know this is what I enjoy using the most. As far as optics are concerned, obviously this is mostly personal preference, but for me, I use the Micro Dot 2. I've got a modification for that. My modifications are down in the description if you're curious as to like what I use. All of it's down there. You can look it up over either on Mod.io or a Nexus. Not really going to get into it too much, but mod.io is better. Obviously, if you want to manually download the mod, it's a little bit quicker if you don't have premium, but you can also do it in the game itself through the mod.io interface. However, if you don't want to download mods, I would recommend staying away from the vanilla Micro Dot 2. Hopefully I'm not confusing anybody when I go into that. Obviously the Sig Romeo is also something I would avoid. This is a mod, but whatever replaces the Sig Romeo, I would avoid that one too. There's a couple different red dots that you'll notice don't have the best sight picture. So without the modifications, I would always run the HoloSight XPS3. I think it has the best sight picture in the game. Close second would be the SRS. Obviously, I have a modification for that too. And I do apologize in advance. I know this could probably be confusing for those of you that don't run mods. But I'd highly recommend checking them out if you haven't already. But regardless, you know, the XPS3 I think is a great, good run-of-the-mill red dot. Muzzle doesn't really matter. It doesn't really change anything too significantly in the game. The suspects are going to hear your suppressors most of the time anyway, unless you're pretty far away, depending on the map. I don't really think that actually has any significant value. I just think people like it because of the because it's a suppressor and everybody likes being super tactical, right? I normally run it unsuppressed depending on the mission. I go back and forth. I do enjoy having like that SWAT sim aesthetic, and for example, LAPD, the HK416 is their primary rifle, but you'll see other guys run on different rifles, but not very often will they run suppressors, and it's like that with most SWAT teams. They're not always going to be running suppressors, so that's like a personal preference. And now for the grips, obviously you've got a bunch of different options here. I never really noticed any huge, I guess, functionality changes using these different grips, but I like using the angled because of the way the character holds the gun. He kind of has like a tight grip on it in the front, which is really cool. And then obviously I'd always recommend running a flashlight over a laser pointer or an IR. And I've got a mod that kind of gives both the aesthetic look of the IR as well as the side tack light, which I think is really cool. That mod's down in the description as well. Obviously, if you're running a very NVG heavy map and you know you're going to be running NVGs most of the map, obviously go with the PEQ, go with the laser. And obviously this one's only visible with the night vision on, so make sure you use that as well. And then the laser pointer is kind of useless. I don't really know why people are so obsessed with seeing a visible laser, but those of you that don't really know, don't have a lot of experience with like military or tactical or SWAT, whatever, well, police in general, is that visible lasers aren't really commonly used at all in a real life situation. And obviously it's because it's visible to the enemy. However, there are other options to use a visible laser to like kind of silently get people to move away from like a location, an area of effect, for example. Like if you have an operation going on, special forces will do that. They'll flicker on their visible laser to get like non-combatants to leave the area, which I think is really cool. If you're interested in that, I definitely check out a video where they go into detail with like laser devices and stuff. But definitely I always recommend the flashlight to kind of illuminate your targets. Even if you're running NVGs, the flashlight is still really good. You can go back and forth by flipping your NVGs and then turning your tack light on, because you're going to have moments where when you're running NVGs, you might have like some light that gets in the way, like some distortion, and even though part of a hallway is dark, you might have like a portion of it that's really bright and it can fuck with your vision. So you want to flip your night vision up and then always have that light there. And maybe in the future we'll have the ability to swap between the different lasers. You can do it in real life, so I don't see why you can't do it in the game. And I think Void has told us that they're going to be doing that in the future. And I know I'm really going into detail here. Hopefully it's not too much information thrown at you guys at once, but again, I just want to make sure you guys get the good information here. Okay, moving on, I'd highly recommend with a sidearm something that has a higher capacity. I will run the Glock 19, or I'll run the PFC9, which is also a Glock. I think it's a Glock 17, but it's got like a different like type of sidearm here, or sorry, a slide. And either way, you want to pick something that's got a high capacity. That's what I would recommend for newer players. I would recommend that just for anybody, and obviously it's pretty self-explanatory why you want high capacity. I only run 2 extra mags with my pistol because I obviously you're going to use your pistol in some situations, but not as often as you would think. I personally like the way the Glock 19 looks more than the PFC9. I do like the sights, but for whatever reason there's something about just the 19 that I enjoy, and I also own a 19 in real life, so I think that probably factors into it. But if we look at like the USP, for example, these weapons have good stopping power because it's a 45 caliber. Same thing with like a Magnum, but you have to remember a Magnum isn't very practical in a lot of situations. In real life, more than not. I mean, it's a video game, I get that, but I've never really seen the reason to carry the 357 Magnum at all. I'd highly stay away from that, to be honest. I think it's got a lot of recoil, and it's really not worth it. I feel like the USP 45 would be a close second because of the stopping power, and it has a little bit more capacity than the Colt 45. LAPD typically still uses the M45A1 or the Colt, whatever you want to call it. But I personally just, like I said, capacity is pretty much what I like to run, and that's what I would recommend for you guys as well. A taser would be something that I'd recommend going in with AI. If you're cooperating with like doing co-op and you have a team, even running a taser in those situations could be good. But overall, you got to remember that your cartridges for like your pistol mags are going to be the same for your cartridges with the taser, so you got to be mindful. And sometimes in a lot of situations you're giving up a lot of lethal coverage when you're pulling out a taser, so you got to make sure that your AI is covering you, because if they're off doing their own thing and they're not watching a suspect sprinting at you, that could be the difference between you know, winning a mission and not winning a mission. So it's kind of a hit or miss when you use the taser, and we'll get into it in a second, but you also have the option to use the pepper spray, which would still allow you to have a handgun. So I'd always just recommend having a handgun. Moving on, I always run a mirror gun. I think it's probably the best in single player situations. Co-op, you could pretty much run whatever you want as long as you cooperate with your team and tell them like, hey, what are you running, and you know, should I run this, and just kind of having a conversation. Obviously, single player solo, the mirror gun is the best because your teammates can use the mirror gun. The AI teammates can use the mirror gun on doors, but depending, like for example, I use a modification where they don't have the correct voice lines because it's real police yells, so I can't hear if the room is clear or not. So I won't ever be telling my my AI to check rooms. However, if you tell them to check a room, they'll give you a good explanation as to what's going on. But I honestly think it's 100 times better to check it yourself and verify where the suspects are in the room, how many, what type of weapons, you know, is there a guy in front of the door with a shotgun? Like, a lot of this is crucial information that an AI cannot tell you. So I'd always recommend a mirror gun over anything else. If you need to have the door kicked open or a breaching shotgun, the AI can do, well, they can't battering ram a door, sorry, but they can use a breaching shotgun. They can't use the tubes, but very rarely will you ever need to use the tubes in single player. And I'll go into detail with that here in a second, but either way, overall, the AI is really good at just aimbotting. Continuing, I always run light armor, and the reason I run light armor over everything else is obviously you have more slots when you use the anti-stab vest, but you have little to no protection against most calibers. The light armor is a good middle ground. You've got decent mobility with decent protection. I run front and back ceramic. Steel is super heavy. It gives you the most protection, but I don't like the slow down or the speed ups. How do I say this? There's like an inertia, I guess. Inertia is the word I was looking for. And when you slow down, you speed up, there's an inertia that kind of keeps you from being able to move out of the way of a threat. Maybe it's a doorway or whatever. So being able to get through a doorway or being able to get into cover is more important than me than having like super heavy armor where I'm just a tank, right? And even if you did run super heavy armor, which depending on your situation, if you're going for survivability, which typically I'm pretty conditioned in the game, I don't really need to be super slowed down to have more protection. Light armor is perfect for me because I can go between quickly being able to move in and out of a room or in and out of cover, and I have a lot more control over my inertia. So that's why I run light armor, and I choose ceramic over steel. Steel makes you super heavy, and ceramic is a good middle ground. Continuing on as to what I run as far as my equipment, I run 4 magazines. I mostly always run AP, which is armor piercing rounds. This actually got messed up here, so I'm going to edit slots, and I've got 4 rifle magazines, 2 pistol magazines, 1 tactical, and 6 flash grenades. I really like to be in control of my flash grenades. For example, let's say you don't need to flash a room, you're trying to flash like an open area. Well, the AI really fucking suck at throwing flashbangs in open areas. They tend to flash me a lot. So what I will do is I will flash open areas or hallways, and I'll have my team move up to reduce the chances that I'm going to get shot and my AI will get shot, and they'll take care of the threat, right? So 4 rifle mags, 2 pistol mags, 6 flash grenades, and 1 tactical. And I'll go into detail what I run. I run door wedges almost all the time. C2 explosives, I can have the AI do that. Pepper spray is kind of a hit or miss. If I have a team with me and I'm doing co-op, I'll sometimes do pepper spray. You just have to remember that your AI isn't going to deploy any less lethals unless you give them like a beanbag shotgun or something like that, but that's something for another day. The lockpick gun is pretty much useless to me unless you're doing something silly like a speed run for a hostage rescue and you're trying to be as quiet as possible, which I think is just ridiculous. The lockpick gun does open doors quickly, but you can literally just kick a door once and swing the door open right afterwards. It'll break the lock. So even though it does give away a little bit of stealth to begin with. If you're trying to be stealthy, I mean, I'm not going to give up one of my other tacticals. I could just literally use the lockpick that I get for free that takes like 4 extra seconds. So I think it's useless. Don't bother with it. So door wedges or pepper spray, I mostly always go with 1. And I know it says ×1, but you get 2 door wedges. So if I were to give myself ×2, it would be 4 door wedges. And that's typically what I run. I know it went a little bit longer than I wanted to there. But continuing on as to what I recommend for you guys. Now, obviously, high-powered rifle is the #1 thing. The ARWC isn't bad, but the HK416, I think I just like that a little bit more because I have the most experience with it. But most of these rifles in the assault rifle list are pretty good. The SR16 isn't bad. I think it's the worst out of all the rifles. The M4A1 has good controllability, but it doesn't have as much stopping power as the HK or the ARWC. The ARN-18 I don't really have a lot of experience of. The Mark 1 is for supporters only, so don't get confused when you see that on my list. But they made this about the same as the SLR, or sorry, not the SLR, the SR16, and it's kind of dog shit now because of that. However, it does look the best out of all the rifles, I think, but that's one of the reasons why I avoid it. So ARWC or the HK is what I would pretty much recommend. Any type of high-powered rifle, definitely feel free to experiment and see what you like the most. Like I said before, when I was going over my kit, Glock 19, any type of high-capacity pistol, mirror gun, 100%. Now, as far as body armor goes, and I know I'm going back a little bit as to what I was saying, but for somebody who's definitely looking for survivability, if you're new to the game and you're having issues winning fights, 100% just go with the heavy armor. You do have to remember you're losing 2 slots. So light armor, you have 13 slots, and heavy armor, you have 11. So you're definitely missing out on the different types of capacity of what you can carry, which can be a big problem depending on your situation. But at the end of the day, if you're new to the game and you're having trouble winning fights and you're just getting bodied, go with the heavy armor just for the survivability and the ability to complete the maps, because that's probably what you're mostly having issues with. Now, along with that, I would recommend, we gotta change the slots here. Obviously, ceramic over steel. So I forgot to mention that. Steel is great for protection. If you want to give it a try, I'd go for it. But even though steel gives you the most protection, it really slows you down, regardless of whether or not you're running heavy armor. Steel really does it. Like that's what changes the inertia values the most, and I do have a video on that if you guys want to check it out. I kind of go into detail as to what the best armor is and kind of talking about it. They might change this up in the future, but either way. So with the slots, I'm definitely going to be putting down the sidearm to 2. I don't want to go any lower than 2 because remember, this also counts as 1 magazine in the gun. At least as far as I know, it counts as 1 magazine in the gun. And then rifle ammunition, I've got 4. Grenades, I'm going to tick that up, move tactical down to 1. I'm going to have 4 grenades to kind of help my teammates flash, use bangs, and then my tactical will be 1. I'll save that. Now, obviously, pepper spray wouldn't be too bad for you newer guys kind of getting used to taking down suspects in a non-lethal manner, not always going lethal. But door wedges aren't bad either. Like I said, C2 explosives, you can have your AI do that. You don't need to do that. Just have the AI do it. And the reason I want to kind of get into this for a second. The reason I would choose flashbangs over everything else is pretty simple. I've always used flashbangs since the beginning of the game over everything else. Maybe sometimes stingers. What I notice about CS gas is that it doesn't completely fill the room, and I don't know if they're ever going to change this, but I guess more or less the value of the flashbang is way more compared to the CS gas and the stinger. The CS gas doesn't fill the room enough. Everybody's got to wear gas masks, and it makes like this really weird haze that doesn't affect the AI visibility, but it affects your visibility. So you have to fight through smoke when you're breaching a room, and if the gas doesn't affect a suspect that's in an adjacent room, they're just just going to laser beam you through the smoke. So that's one of the reasons why I would stay away from the gas until you get a little bit more seasoned and maybe run co-op. Now the Stinger grenade isn't bad, however, the Stinger grenade has a large area of effect that it covers. So like, let's say you want to clear out a big open area outside on a map and you got a couple suspects and you need to make sure that they are stunned. Stinger grenades are amazing for those situations, but most of the time you're going to be clearing rooms with flashbangs and like smaller rooms, or sorry, I'm saying this incorrectly. 9 times out of 10, most of your rooms that you are clearing will be small to medium-sized rooms, which won't necessarily require the use of a Stinger. They will require the use of a flashbang, which would be the most practical. However, you're probably wondering, well, if the Stinger clears a higher range of effect, why would I want to use a flashbang if there's no disadvantages? Well, there is a disadvantage using the Stinger. If you use a Stinger grenade in a small to medium-sized room, and maybe the grenade doesn't go all the way inside the room or doesn't go deep enough, and 9 times out of 10 this always happens, is the Stinger grenade will go off and it'll push the door back into the team, which completely opens it up and swings it in the opposite way of where you're breaching, which could interrupt your tactical entry, right? So just because, you know, the fact that it swings the door open, it'll swing other doors open too, right? So it won't just swing open the door where you're breaching, but it'll swing open adjacent doors inside the room, which could expose you to more threats. And that's why I recommend using the flashbang over both of those. And whenever we get the 9-bang in, I guess is when we'll really need to do the biggest breakdown of all. And really that's it. I think we got into everything, aside obviously the headwear is kind of a personal preference thing. Obviously you're not going to be running a gas mask unless you're running gas, so avoid that altogether. NVGs are great for low light maps. I wouldn't recommend, like I was saying before, I definitely would not recommend running NVGs constant. I know a lot of people do this, but you will have situations where there'll be like super bright light and you won't be able to necessarily get a good visual confirmation on your subject in certain conditions, which is why if I am going to run NVGs in a map, 9 times out of 10 I'm always going to bring a white light with me rather than an IR, so that way I can flip the NVG up and use my white light to kind of visually get a better target acquisition. If I'm not running NVGs, I'm always running anti-flash goggles, just because if a flashbang for whatever reason, your AI can flash you. It doesn't happen as often as it used to, but just in case you fuck up a flashbang or they mess up a flashbang, it won't have as much effect as it would be without the flash goggles. And the ballistic face mask, I don't know how much protection it actually gives you, but I've always pretty much gone by the idea that the ballistic face mask will make you heavier and it barely gives you any more protection than what it's worth. As far as I know, these ballistic face masks are graded for like pistol rounds, like 9x18 ammunition and like 9x19, and the most of the suspects are going to be running heavier ammunition for the most part. So I would just avoid the ballistic face mask unless you're going in with like a shield and you're going fully heavy armored out. It's just going to slow you down. So definitely the anti-flash goggles or the NVGs. And that's going to pretty much cover it, everybody. Definitely a little bit longer than what I wanted it to be. I anticipated this to be a pretty quick video. However, I was definitely wrong on that one. However, I think it's important, though, that I give as much information as possible because I know people are going to find this to be extremely valuable, especially those that are new to the game and definitely need some guidance clearing these maps. Because if you're new and you've never played, you're not really used to tactical shooters, it's definitely something that you could benefit from, kind of having a little bit of guidance. So hopefully I helped you guys with this. Any questions, make sure you put them down in the comments and I'll try my best to answer. Either way, that's going to be everything. I hope I covered everything, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys so much.